Welcome everybody, TennesseeRedStar. We're going to be picking back up where we left off on Blood in My Eye. And real quick comment, I realized in the last reading that I mispronounced acquiesce. I said acquiesce, and that's how I know I was tired when I was recording that part of the reading. And like I record a lot of these late at night, like it's damn near midnight when I'm recording this, and sometimes I'm tired as hell when I record these. And I could definitely tell that was one of those moments when I was back editing that, when I heard myself say acquiesce, and I was like, I think I mean acquiesce. Anyhow, let's dive right back into it. We're on page 50 of Blood Mine. The prestige of power as a subjective effect of a past deed or reputation, real or fancied, then has a very definite life process. The prestige of the capitalist class inside the U.S. reached its maturity with the close of the 1860 to 64 Civil War. Since that time, there have been no serious threats to their power. Their excesses have taken on a certain legitimacy through long usage. Prestige bars any serious attack on power. Do people attack a thing they consider with awe, with a sense of its legitimacy? In the process of things, the prestige of power emerges roughly in that period when power does not have to exercise its underlying basis, violence. Having proved and established itself, it drifts, secure from any serious challenge. Its automatic defense attack instincts remain alert. Small threats are either ignored away, laughed away, or in the cases that may build into something dangerous, slapped away. To the masters of capital, the most dreadful omen of all is revolutionary scientific socialism. The gravedigger evokes few response. Prestige wanes if the first attacks on its power base find it wanting. Prestige dies when it cannot prevent further attacks upon itself. All intellectual arguments against the necessity of counterviolence, even in the opening stages of a people's war against an industrial establishment such as one in the USA, are false. We can stop the debate. Prestige must be destroyed. People must see the venerated institutions and the omnipotent administrator actually under physical attack. They must be assured that the heavens will not hurl lightning bolts at people's heads for challenging the rights of property. Then, although international capitalism has shot its last bolts, it is not exactly harmless. If the threat to power is truly revolutionary and the first step into revolutionary consciousness taken with the forceful attack upon prestige, we must anticipate reaction, accept repression's terror, and meet it with the counter-terror of our own. The gravedigger needs a bodyguard to protect him at this work, else the grave may be his own. The debate between the vanguard elements should end. The argument that the prestige of power will let itself be educated away is too idiotic to be allowed to stand. Waiting for power to move to its inevitable collapse is suicidal for all concerned. Blacks and other third world peoples have the very imminent prospect of genocidal tactics to contend with, and we can now all see that the modern industrial state, motivated by the interests of exclusive groups of capitalist masters, cannot regulate itself to make possible an inclusive production and distribution of goods, or production without a massive waste of resources and destruction of all that stands about. The debate ends and the action begins. It is not a question of the necessity of violence, but how to organize it to fit our unique situation, to tie it with a flawless exactitude to our political activity, and to organize it immediately. Comrade George, I read recently from a textbook edited by my favorite writer, W. Pomeroy, that a city street could actually be considered as a defile. A convoy of any kind trapped in a defile on the countryside is easy prey for the forces positioned above and about it. Jonathan. It is absolutely certain that every fascist military thinker and official in the world has devoted time and study to the works of the great guerrilla tacticians Mao, Ho, Giap, Guevara, Pomeroy, Fanon, Nkrumah. The fundamentals of People's War are no secret. It would seem that Giap's People's Army, People's War, or Guevara's guerrilla warfare, and other masterworks on poor people's war, once published for the world to study, would blunt their effectiveness at least a little. That is, until one has studied in depth and understood. Guerrilla warfare by its very nature is invulnerable. Advanced scientific guerrilla strategy worked out over the first 3 quarters of this century is not, contrary to popular image, merely a hit and run haphazard affair. In spite of the need for improvisation and mobility, and in spite of its poverty and its daring, it is scientific. The man who labored over its construction had as a task the forging of an instrument which would enable an indignant and weaponless people to resist and overcome a ponderous mechanized army dependent upon an industrial base and operating on a systemized thought. It is a perfect tool. Perfect. No establishment army can countervail it. The best example of this new fighting style, the urban guerrilla, is the spectacular success of the Tupamaros, the military arm of Uruguay's national liberation movement. Brilliantly organized, they have carried out well-planned operations such as burning down plants, General Motors, without harming a single worker, robbing impregnable fortresses such as the casino of Punta del Este, kidnapping hated officials, ambassadors, and bankers, and seizing whole towns long enough to explain their purpose and revolutionary commitment, assassinating key repressive agents, such as the chief of police's special squad, sabotaging imperialism's and industrial military complexes, and raiding police military outposts to capture arms and ammunition. Gurasi outlines their fighting strategy as follows. The objective is manifold: to threaten the establishment, to cause it to panic and make serious tactical mistakes, such as resorting to mass repression, which radicalizes the population against them, to establish the underground revolutionary apparatus, including active participants, trusted but passive collaborators, who will carry out the liaison, communication, logistic, and propaganda needs of the revolutionary armies in the cities. 3. To test new recruits in relative security, for though police infiltrators are bound to creep in and stay in the organization for future need, even if they have to kill their own to do so. The fact that for a long time urban groups will operate independently of each other keeps sweeping arrests of urban guerrillas down to a minimum. 4. To demoralize the rank and file and even the officers of the repressive forces as they see themselves constantly but unexpectedly under attack. It is said to kill policemen indiscriminately is to forget the working class background of the cop on the beat. This is as absurd as trying to save the ordinary soldiers whom the Vietnamese must kill to survive. 5. To panic local capitalists to withdraw their funds from specific areas, thus hurting the local warlords and politicians who profit from these investments. 6. To frighten away foreign investors, which will affect the whole bureaucratic oligarchy. 7. To force the U.S. to constantly extend its intervention, which will tax its resources, hence discontent at home, and spread its imperialistic arms, rendering it more vulnerable abroad. At this point, I must make clear that I am certainly not warning the military establishment or their capitalist masters, nor am I advocating the overthrow of the established American government. When I use the initials USA in these observations, it must be understood I could quite as easily be referring to the Union of South Africa, USA. The government of the USA and all that it stands for, all that it represents, must be destroyed. This is the starting point and the end. We have the means to this end. The problem is to develop the acceptance of their use. The first struggle is one must be waged within our own minds. We must in all haste transcend the intellectual inhibitions that prelude support of at least the minimum level of violence that must develop concomitantly with each political thrust. Our attitudes must change before we can expect any response from the people, workers, students, lumpen proletariat. We must accept the eventuality of bringing the USA to its knees, except the closing off of critical sections of the city with barbed wire, armored pig carriers crisscrossing the street, soldiers everywhere, Tommy guns pointed at the stomach level, smoke curling black against the daylight sky, the smell of cordite, house-to-house searches, doors being kicked down, the commonness of death. Then we must learn the forms of resistance, the booby trap, the silenced pistol and rifle, the pitting of streets to slow them down, the wrecking of heavy equipment to block their efficient movement, false walls, hidden sub-basements, tunnels, Vietnamese style, destruction of critical elements of the facilities that support the establishment order. We must learn the value of infiltration. It works better for us than it does the opposition. We simply stop allowing ourselves to be hunted, and we do some stalking of our own. Their secret police aren't really too secret at all. Right now, we can go numbering, naming, compiling information on them all. They're too visible to be safe. Revolution is aggressive. Just where are we? Where is this country skidding to? In the morning, the fight will have begun. And considering all of the establishment's protective agencies, even those that are quasi secret, none of them can hide themselves. Any establishment, institution, or organization that enjoys prestige, that exists openly above ground, is by this definition weak, or at least vulnerable to a determined attack. When the purpose of your military tactics is to build and guard some object or point of supposed advantage, the defender can actually be thought of as being under siege, the guard himself a standing target. The fortress and all its sources, mechanized and human, for all its imposing strength, cannot exist for long under persistent attack, deprived of the opportunity to replenish, repair, and renew itself. If the opposing military forces that have laid the siege are nameless, faceless, numberless, indistinguishable from all the millions that exist about the establishment, and when the establishment's military forces sally forth from their beleaguered fortress to do battle, what must be the result? They must cause suffering to the innocent, since it is impossible for them to know us, thus making new enemies. They will restrict the freedom of our known or suspected political parties, the freedom of others who may have been neutral or sympathetic to them. They will make themselves targets for our hidden machine gun, sniper rifle, silenced pistol, mortar, anti-tank rocket, flamethrower. Counterterrorism will bring on the stage 2 fascist repression. There is no question in our minds, blacks, men under hatches, about the nature of the ruling class. The exceedingly violent disposition of the USA ruling class is well documented with just a glance into our lives and the order of our deaths. The point is to reveal senseless violence to the entire revolutionary class, or classes. Counterterrorism is a mighty tool, and the only one at our disposal in the opening stages of people's war. In some cases, in other revolutionary societies, this level of violence alone was sufficient to win all the demands of the people. However, I'm sure that here it will not be sufficient because of the complexities of the USA class structure and the complexities and its stockpile of potential further violence. Many of the small demands of a sizable portion of the population are slowly being met at the expense of all the rest of us and the world's people. A new pig-oriented class has been created at the bottom of our society from which the ruling class will be always able to draw some support. Consequently, our task will be to move from counter-terrorist tactics into the second stage of a larger guerrilla unit operation. Over 90% of the USA population live in cities and towns, and although some of the principles of classic Mao Che-style guerrilla operations must be used to stop the orderly flow of intercity and interstate commerce, most of the real fighting must take place inside the nerve centers of the nation, the cities. This is an entirely new situation in the development of People's War, whereas classic types of third world movements generally relied upon the strangling of provincial capitals, where the enemy colonial power tended to concentrate itself. In urban guerrilla warfare, where the colonies can be said to be situated within the city, the process or tactics will be unique. Though the basic strategy is the same, urban guerrilla warfare differs from all that has ever taken place in the arena of guerrilla against the God State. There are similarities between our situation and that of the growing movement of the Uruguayan people, and perhaps we can draw from their experience. But to be realistic, the disparity in size and population, the relative strength of the enemy state institutions and their global sweep must be seriously taken into account. Uruguay, as a colony of Anglo-America, defeated the Uruguayan government, and a change in the present property relations would of necessity mean the defeat of a section of the American imperial structure. The comparison between ourselves and the Algerian liberation experience is almost untenable, though there may be some small tactical lessons to be gleaned from their urban effort. It must be kept in mind that the principal battles that led to the people's victory were fought on the countryside between massive French mechanized divisions and the classical guerrilla army of the people. The Battle of Algiers was only aided by the forces within. The people's fifth column within the city of Algiers was not a model of perfection simply because the principal effort, energy, and motive forces were isolated in the classical guerrilla units that engaged the French expeditionary forces for control of the countryside. At issue there, in Algeria, there were such things as crude petroleum, 62% of the nation's exports, agricultural products, 18%, and some iron ore. All these basic raw minerals were, of course, located in the countryside and had to be protected by the French. The war for control of the USA is unique, and its heartbeat can be stopped only by placing our primary forces in the valleys and defiles of the city streets. USA is the colonial master, the center of the imperial process, where the raw materials are worked into finished manufactured products to be recirculated back into the exterior and interior colonies. In a comparison of the classical forms of wars of liberation fought in the outlying colonies and the one we must yet formulate, a vital question is immediately brought to our attention. Does it work in such a totally different setting? A theoretical examination indicates that it does. In fact, urban people's guerrilla warfare may prove to be an even more effective tool than the classic type. The same advantages are present, the same possibilities, plus some that exist simply because the fight is taking place within the cities, the nerve center of the nation. The enemy culture, the established government, exists first of all because of its inability to govern, to maintain enough order to ensure that a cycle of sorts exists between the various levels and elements of the society. Law and order is their subjective. Ours is perfect disorder. Our aim is to stop the life cycle of the enemy culture and replace it with our own revolutionary culture. This can be done by creating perfect disorder within the cycle of the enemy's culture life process and leaving a power vacuum to be filled by building our revolutionary culture. When the fight takes place within the cities, the disorder will clearly be hastened. This will have an immediate effect on the consciousness of the bulk of the population and will strain the relationship between the government and governed to the utmost. If the life of the manufacturing city is to be stopped, it is clear that the normal processes, at least, will be slowed by a convoy of establishment trucks, tanks, or troops simply moving in the city's arteries where commercial convoys should be moving. The necessary checkpoints will further slow it. Each one of the opposition's own tank shells that is fired inside the manufacturing city at the elusive guerrilla will destroy some aspect of that factory city and undercut the ability of the establishment to produce another tank shell. It will not help the fascist cause very much at all when the armored personnel carrier or Jeep patrol equipped with 30 caliber machine guns fires into a downtown shopping crowd at the elusive guerrilla who is taking refuge among them. The people just will not understand. The cities of the fascist USA, built straight up with very little real planning or pattern, the twisting side streets, gangways, connecting roofs, manholes, storm drains, concrete and steel trees will hide a guerrilla army just as effectively as any force. There's the added advantage that being in an area doesn't automatically make one suspect in fair game, as is the case when an establishment army unit spots a gathering, no matter how innocent, in an area where guerrilla movements have been reported in the countryside. Just being out there defines it. The fact that the guerrilla can hide himself fairly easily inside large population centers does not mean that hard work needn't be done toward the winning of popular support. It simply means that failure to gain full support for violent confrontation doesn't preclude violent confrontation. We're going to repeat that line. It simply means that failure to gain full support for violent confrontation doesn't preclude violent confrontation. If all elements exist that have made guerrilla warfare in its classical style an invincible weapon against the mechanized, industrial-based armies in undeveloped areas, they will be even more successful in built-up American conditions. The facts that make it impossible for the establishment army to overcome the attacking guerrilla army, in spite of the ability of the knowledge contained in the masterworks on guerrilla strategy, become clear when we realize that after the strategy is understood by the guerrilla chief, the tactics applicable to his particular military problems are a product of his imagination alone. Constant creative improvising, also working against the establishment's general staff, is its own mentality. They've convinced themselves, or have been convinced by their experience at war with other mechanized armies, that having the most at the right time wins war. In other words, they feel that winning wars depends mainly on gadgets, and they presume that they can dictate the terms and grounds upon which each battle takes place. They're locked in on a fixed set of systemized ideas that conflict completely with the realities of people's war. Their egos simply will never allow them to admit that all the ingenuity that has gone into the development of the Blitzkrieg has been wasted. A $100,000 tank can be destroyed with $2 worth of materials. A jet is useless against riflemen, and it also can be destroyed with one well-placed burst from an assault rifle or destroyed on the ground by mortar from miles away. Then, too, the pilot, years in the making, can be killed with a knife. The copter, as a fighting machine, is the most stupid of all the costly gadgets. It can be heard from miles away. It can't be armored. A 10-cent bullet can render it useless. All these contraptions require liquid fuels that will stop flowing when the production of all other commodities stop. Fighting really depends upon the people. Small, easily machined portable weapons. Another factor that works to the advantage of the guerrilla army is time. The establishment forces cannot survive the prolonged unrest that is steadily building. Profits fall, the point of diminishing returns is eventually reached, and from there, the establishment's force and energy goes into its last stages of life. While our new revolutionary culture is building, musical chairs where each go round excludes some element of their control factors. The objective, I repeat, of the destruction of a city-based industrial establishment and its protective forces is to create perfect disorder, to disrupt all of their interacting processes that allow them to produce and distribute goods. And this can be done from within the process much more easily than from without. Really, there is no possibility of an established government ever overcoming a determined internal enemy. By their very nature, the holder or owner and his guard are exposed and vulnerable. A comparison between their mode of existence and that of the people's vanguard elements employing all the subtle scientific principles of urban guerrilla warfare will demonstrate clearly where the real power lies. top-heavy establishment organizations that exist openly are always a reflection of the men who staff them. Of primary interest to the guerrilla are the bureaucratic institutions that serve to protect the right of the wrongdoers to do their wrong. The local and federal pig establishments. The complexities of the class structure have shifted somewhat since the time of Marx and Lenin. Presently, within the working class, there exists an ultra right section at the bottom of this structure which feels that all of its demands on life can be met by the existing order. In fact, the working class of the USA, 1971, can be realistically divided into two mutually exclusive and conflicting sections, one right oriented and conservative, the other left to neutral. One explanation for this phenomenon is the loss over the years to fascist nationalistic propaganda and state controlled media of a clear cut class consciousness. In effect, it can be said that this right wing oriented sector of the working class is a new class, a new pig class. In their ranks, we can find the factory or construction worker or the ubiquitous civil service employee, the retired military careerman, the man who sells the used autos or insurance, the store clerk or longshoreman, the stock clerk or longshoreman about to be replaced by a machine. All of these individuals are not clearly in the new pig class. Some only have just one foot in the grave. As yet, they only have pig tendencies and can still be redeemed. Outright pigs must either be neutralized or destroyed. From the new pig class, a section of the working class whose demands are small and are being slowly met by the capitalist masters, the government draws its greatest support. The forces of counter-revolution make themselves felt on the street level through this new class, while above this class, in the loosely defined petite bourgeois level and upper middle class professionals and students, we can find some very real revolutionary consciousness. There are explanations for this complex inverted stratification of revolutionary potential. The history of the USA and its immigrants, the emphasis placed on the subversion of the workers' movement, unions, by the ruling class, and the apparent, not real, stabilizing of the economy with fascist Keynesian controls and redoubled imperialist expansion. All can be carefully treated to explain the present confusion and contradictions in the class struggle, but most of this I leave to Comrade Newton, who has handled it well so far. This is a comment on what to do with what we have and what we are realistically faced with. The top-heavy bureaucratic agencies that exist with quasi-social sanction, and in particular the ones that were given over to the maintenance of law and order, draw their principal personnel from the pig class and consequently are an expression of that class's mentality, a stagnant and even atavistic mentality that is completely dependent upon regimen and rote to perform the simplest of functions. First of all, the opposition is stupid. However, let me qualify this statement with the observation that they make up for what they lack in brains with sheer brutality. As a result of their original drawback, stupidity, they have expanded to massive proportions and tied themselves irrevocably to technology based on massive and equally faultable machines, now that it is impossible for them to ever hide any of their movements, to move with any real speed, or to change themselves in response to any change in our attack. The very nature of their apparatus, its supposed legality and size, tends to weaken it. Their growing demand for personnel leaves them helpless to stop us from infiltrating them. Their cybernetics cannot overcome the fact that men, especially of the pig class, are cyclic. They think, function, and live in cycles. There's more to their detriment than ours. Their science of control turns upon them to weaken and wreck their own institutions. How can a massive department or bureau or regiment with hundreds of personnel ever coordinate any activity without the strictest regimentation, without a massive meeting place to familiarize themselves with procedures, without badges or uniforms to identify each other, without systematized patterns of thought and behavior, without independence on clear-cut orders? Simple pig types can only learn to function by rote and in cycles. Procedure must be drilled into them and only seldom, if ever, changed. It is quite easy for a pig to perform a particular function in the same way, time after time. Once he has learned the function, it is not easy to vary, especially when there are great numbers of the same types of individuals involved. What would be the result if each pig were given a different job each day in a different area, or if he had to vary his code every week, or think for himself just one 8 hour shift? Chaos. If it weren't for the sergeant or lieutenant and the routine, when the average pig ran out of gas, his car would have to be pushed out of the street by the citizenry. When his bullets ran out, he would have only a club until he could check with his captain. Cyclic men equipped with only a few learned responses can be watched, clocked, photographed, and anticipated. Their code isn't really a code at all. They're finished. A pig is a fool. They have numbers over the small vanguard element and the social license to kill. But once we decide on the proper action, we will find that our enemies are vulnerable. For the soldiers of the people, the guerrillas, though they also must operate with the tightest structure and in complete harmony with their political branch, cycles are not a factor in their operations. The subtleties and fundamentals of urban guerrilla warfare can be broken down to their simplest terms in this way. Number one, first, mobility. Only the light, portable, easily machined, or stolen weapons are employed by the guerrilla under normal circumstances. On rare conditions, he may hire or commandeer a heavy piece of equipment for an isolated or special purpose, which fits in with the improvised, extemporaneous nature of this form of combat. The bomb in all of its various forms, Bangalore, mortar, satchel charge, hand grenade, the anti-tank rocket launcher, the sniper's rifle, the light machine gun, the silenced pistol, the flamethrower, the poison dart, the poison bullet, the crossbow, the knife, the fist, all form the guerrilla arsenal. Provision must be made to move men and equipment in spite of the condition of today's streets and roads in the cities. That means making use of the new four-wheel drive civilian type jeeps, station wagons, and motorcycles. The bicycle will regain popularity. Heavy vehicles, the jeeps, trucks, vans, all ordinary looking family or commercial looking vehicles, but armored with either plastic or steel, can be either rented or commandeered. All dwellings should be rented and expendable. They should be equipped so that when forced to leave by tunnel or other hidden exits, the place can be burned to create further confusion for the attacker and destroy evidence. Food and clothing should be purposely simple. Clothing must always be available for disguises. Although part of the guerrilla's function is to hijack and commandeer food in non-perishable form from the enemy cultures and stockpiles, he should also learn to identify the food plants that grow wild all over the country, even in backyards and vacant lots. He should also learn to want less. Infiltration. Right now, we can be placing our soldiers inside the various police and military and prison staffs. Our more gifted and better educated comrades could end up in the intelligence units of the army and police. Our major source of weapons should come from our men placed in the military under seemingly ordinary circumstances. This is our enemy's greatest weakness. Any establishment's greatest weakness is the need for personnel to resist the people. This lays them open to infiltration. The guerrilla army that operates within the city is necessarily small, so we can stop infiltration by being very selective and conducting thorough and murderous tests and making full use of the principles underlying departmentalization. The ambush. The only form of attack employed by the guerrilla forces is the ambush, the surprise attack. There must never be any front lines or defending of territory. The only engagements that are carried to completion are the ones that are winning. After an initial attack, if the enemy regains himself and counterattacks, we disengage and simply go home to await the next opportunity when we can catch him asleep, with his women, moving in convoys, on the toilet. Camouflage. Nothing ever appears outwardly as it is. The armor, sheets of plastic or steel, is fixed inside the vans and trucks in such a way to make them appear normal when viewed from without. The military safe house, with tunnels leading in all directions and connecting with other houses, a storm drain, a manhole with bulletproof and airtight plexiglass window, encasements inside the house, camouflage with heavy curtains, rooms with doors that are really booby traps that work from the inside, must be made to look like any other house along the block. We must dress and equip ourselves with weaponry that will allow us to move, even in units of a dozen or more, without appearing to be anything other than private citizens pursuing their private interests. We will make use of all forms of disguise: mailmen, policemen, telephone repairmen, priests, nuns, National Guardsmen. This principle will soon have them shooting at each other or turning the innocents against them. The result: perfect disorder. Autonomous infrastructure. If it is our eventual goal to wear away the establishment's ability to produce and distribute goods, to feed its war machine, or organize any sort of social activity, then of course we must at the same time provide ourselves with the means of performing these functions on at least a subsistence level. Both the military and political arms of the liberation movement must think of the provisioning of their vanguard elements and the people during the dark days when we stop the machine. Military supplies are stockpiled in advance with food staples. Depression days foraging and war years liberation gardens must be reintroduced and refined. The military must depend on the people for food. It must also prepare to feed the people from the enemy's supply. Then you have the very healthy, spontaneous mass looting, perfect disorder. At some point in the development of the overall struggle revolutionary culture, it'll have to become totally independent of the old enemy culture, in keeping with Shay's theory of molding the new society around the struggle against the old. We will start from the beginning to build our own infrastructure in every possible area: people stores, hospitals, banks, buses, armies. This dual power, this building of political infrastructure in the military, is succinctly stated by the Minister of Defense of the Black Panther Party, Huey P. Newton. We recognize that in order to bring the people to the level of consciousness where they would seize the time, it will be necessary to serve their interests in survival by developing programs which would help them to meet their daily needs. For a long time, we have had such programs, not only for survival, but organizational purposes. Now, we not only have a breakfast program for school children, we have a clothing program, we have health clinics, which provide free medical and dental services, we have programs for prisoners and their families, and we are opening clothing and shoe factories to provide for more of the needs of the community. Most recently, we've begun a testing and research program on sickle cell anemia, and we know that 98% of the victims of this disease are black. To fail to combat this disease is to submit to genocide. To battle it is survival. Very true. Very, very true. I just want to add this quick comment. That's 100% true. I mean, the Black Panthers were filling gaps that the government was purposefully leaving unfilled. In fact, I would say that the U.S. government's inaction when it came to sickle cell was a form of genocide. They knew that this disease affected mostly black people, and I mean, especially the mindsets around at that time. What was the point in curing it if you knew that not a lot of white people were going to catch that? Continuing. All these programs satisfy the deep needs of the community, but they are not solutions to our problems. That is why we call them survival programs, meaning survival pending revolution. We say that the survival program of the Black Panther Party is like the survival kit of a sailor stranded on a raft. It helps him to sustain himself until he can get completely out of that situation. So the survival programs are not answers or solutions, but they will help us organize the community around a true analysis and understanding of their situation. When consciousness and understanding is raised to a high level, then the community will seize the time and deliver themselves from the boot of their oppressors. Following this strategy, we at once feel a very real that already exists in the black colony, brown and poor white too, where the people are not being fed, clothed, provided with adequate medical treatment or transportation facilities. This will create the consciousness that comes from the introduction of people's government. It will help the people understand the force and energy of revolution. We are organizing them around their needs. We will not distract them with such empty questions as to who will be elected from which political party. All political parties, as things stand, will support the power complex. Any individual elected will either be a supporter of the established politics or an individual. What would help us, in fact, is to allow as many right-wing elements as possible to assume political power. The warnings that our threats towards self-determination will bring on fascism are irresponsible, or better yet, unrealistic. Fascists already have power. The point is that some way must be found to expose them and combat them. An electoral choice of 10 different fascists is like choosing which way wants to die. Let's repeat that line one more time. An electoral choice of 10 different fascists is like choosing which way wants to die. Now, we can go on and on about lesser evilism and the many pitfalls of lesser evilism. I'm someone who's firmly against lesser evilism because lesser evil to us is still the last evil that someone else will see on a global scale. Clear example of that, Trump. Biden was quote unquote lesser evil of 2020, yet Joe Biden is the lesser evil known by hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. He approved many of the weapons that were used to slaughter those families over there. He gave up on COVID. We could go on and on about how the lesser evil Joe Biden really wasn't that much, really wasn't that far off from lesser evil, if we're being honest. And lesser evil still implies you're making a deal with evil. It's like the trolley analogy, where like one group gets ran over by the trolley. If you pull the lever, it moves to another side of the trolley, and that same group gets ran over, but a bunch of other groups get ran over too. A bunch of other guys get ran over too. Well, in that solution, in that situation, your only real choice, like serious choice, is to destroy the trolley. Stop the trolley from moving by any means necessary. Because acknowledging that pulling the lever will affect the one guy and affect many others, and then continuing to allow the lever to go, not pulling the lever and continuing to allow the trolley to go on its original route will just crush that original one person. So it's like, yeah, you're making a deal with evil and allowing someone to get burned in the process to save your own ass. It's one of many reasons lesser evilism doesn't work. I honestly would rather do a whole separate video on that instead of add to the time of this reading about why I don't believe in lesser evilism and why I'm firmly against it. But that's a quote right there that I just read. An electoral choice of 10 different fascists is like choosing which way one wants to die. Continuing. The holder of the so-called high public office is always merely an extension of the hated ruling corporate class. It is to our benefit that this person is openly hostile, despotic, and unreasoning. We are not living in a nation where left-wing parties hold 80 out of 200 seats in the congressional body, or even 8 out of 200. This is a huge nation dominated by the most reactionary and violent ruling class in the history of the world, where the majority of the people just simply cannot understand that they are existing on the misery and discomfort of the world. Let's repeat that line too. This is a huge nation dominated by the most reactionary and violent ruling class in the history of the world, where the majority of people just simply cannot understand that they are existing on the misery and discomfort of the world. They have been hypnotized into believing that criticism of the expansionist policies of imperialism is really isolationist or injurious to both the USA and the world. We are faced with two choices. Continue as we have done for 40 years, fanning our pamphlets against the hurricane, or starting to build a new revolutionary culture that will be able to turn on the old culture. Collectively, we have that choice. The black colony, as it sits out here alone, has no such choice. In a report from Jonathan Jackson in the early 1970s, he said, "We are not going to wait until the USA attacks the people of the USA or Angola, Mozambique, or any of the other African nations in foment. We can't wait. We shouldn't even allow this thing to happen in Indochina. Bank of America, Chase Manhattan, First National City Bank of New York, Urban Trust Company, the Morgan Monopoly, Manufacturers Hanover Trust, Continental 3 National Bank, First National Bank of Chicago, Bankers Trust Company, and a dozen lesser firms all have great financial interests in the USA now. In 1966, the USA investment in one small African nation was $667 million. It has almost doubled since then. In 1968, 70 to 75% of all goods from the USA entered the USA duty-free. Soon we'll be asked to fight the people of the USA because they're getting the People's Army together. No, I'm not waiting for them to attack a new part of Africa or Asia. I'm entering the war now, on the side of the Vietnamese. The black colony, USA, has little choice. We must enter the war on the side of the majority of the world's people, even if it means fighting the USA majority. We fight to live, and we're learning to fight. It'll be a war, to the knife if necessary. We can't wait until the generation that thinks of blacks as niggas and the rest of the world has been educated away. It may be the reverse that happens. We niggas and gooks may be blown away first. Or if we survive, what will we inherit? A desert? We will mass what people we can. Perhaps that won't be the whole lower class. We'll mass ourselves and any ally we may be able to draw from the whole class structure, and we'll attempt to wage war on property and property rights. Essentially, that is the fight. But even then, some men will die as in all forms of war. But if we cannot draw the support that is necessary for such war, then we see a positive benefit for the majority of the world's people and the reduction of this whole country into a vast wasteland and a graveyard for 200 million of history's most damnable fools. Damn. Damn. That's a line I honestly want to read again right there, because that's a gut punching line. It's a gut punching line that I honestly want you to allow to marinate. So, Jonathan Jackson said, if we cannot draw the support for such a necessary war, then we see the positive benefit of the majority of the world's people, for the majority of the world's people, and the reduction of this whole country to a vast wasteland and a graveyard for 200 million of history's most damnable fools. Wow. 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 In People's War, urban style, each political group moved toward organizing people around their realistic needs will support a corresponding military move. This unity of politics and war will increase the overall revolutionary consciousness by degrees to a point where mass consciousness can be said to exist. The Black Panther Party is the largest and most powerful political force existing outside establishment politics. It draws this power from the people. It is the people's natural political vanguard. Now let us assume the existence of a small, tightly knit, totally committed, and separate military vanguard such as Jonathan Jackson attempted to build. Jonathan was my brother and my closest comrade. I knew him. He was the real super nigga. He worked at it hard. He took complete control of himself. He learned every weapon in the human arsenal, from the flying side thrust foot attack and the quick draw snapshot to the manufacture and use of the mortar. He knew 6,000 ways to kill a man. 30 with a simple stroke of an empty hand or foot. He was 17 years old when he died in the service of the people, on the side of the black colonies, and with the courage of the whole colonized world. Let's assume where Jonathan is concerned that our battle cry reaches some receptive ear, and another hand reaches down to take up our weapon. We have two perfectly harmonious fists, the left front ram of the Black Panthers' political thrust and the left back ram of the August 7th movement. Let's further assume that this nation is one huge city that we can call by its rightful updated name, Johannesburg. This clarifies the understanding of urban people's war, the concept of true internationalism, and the connections, interactions, processes, and effects of a people at war under the leadership of a vanguard which yields a double-edged sword against an isolated enemy element. All the cities of this country can be treated as one interconnecting entity due to the necessity of exchange and interactions caused by the specialization. We can now deal with them as a single entity because of the national character of the Vanguard Party and revolutionary consciousness within the inner black colony. All Anglo-Western cities are generally the same when they are reduced to critical features that support them. I could be talking about London, New York, Chicago, Detroit, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, Paris, Berlin, or Rome instead of Johannesburg. Now picture the USA as the city of the world, surrounded, besieged, and slowly strangled to death by a third force under arms. Using Mao's theoretical springboard, I wish to make further comment on the hypothetical super technological city state and its vulnerability.